The formerly churched is shrinking. The never churched is growing. We have to think through what it means to reach those people.
Welcome to the Propel Podcast, inspiration and innovation to grow your church. I'm your host, Larry Witzel. If God is giving you big dreams for growing His kingdom, then this is the podcast for you. Our goal is to offer practical training for effective evangelism in the Seventh-day Adventist ministry context, but the principles we talk about are applicable in many other churches as well. So wherever you're doing ministry, welcome to the Propel Podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, do us a quick favor. Please leave a review on your favorite platform. It really helps. And if you're on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and subscribe because there's a lot more episodes on the way. This episode features Dr. Roger Walter, lead pastor of the Adventist Community Church in Vancouver, Washington, and president of Evangelism.org. Roger and I go way back, many, many years. I've known Roger as a leader who is passionate about winning the lost and helping people to develop deep spiritual roots. Together with his wife, Gail, he pursues these missions through church planting, pastoring, preaching, and evangelism. Roger's also the author of 2 books, Evangelism Intelligence and Learning Life. In today's episode, Dr. Roger Walter discusses the importance of evangelism and outreach within the church, emphasizing the need to build a culture that prioritizes community engagement and relationship building. He shares personal stories and practical strategies for fostering a welcoming environment that encourages both outreach as well as retention of church members. We'll hear from Roger in just a moment. Before we dive into his presentation, though, I want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of this episode, Forecasting Hope. Created by international speaker and evangelist David Kleindens, Forecasting Hope presents Bible prophecy from a Christ-centered, positive, and relational perspective. The series is turnkey, but is also completely editable. You can preach it as it is, or make it your own to fit the demographics of your unique audience, or tailor it to fit your own ministry context. It's all yours. It's not just about reaching the head, it's about reaching the heart. An evangelistic series is more than just presenting facts, figures, and doctrinal information. It's about introducing people to Jesus Christ and His truths. You can find out more about Forecasting Hope, including where to purchase the preaching kit, sample videos, and testimonials by visiting evangelismmarketing.com/forecastinghope. That's evangelismmarketing.com/forecastinghope. Okay, with that, here is Dr. Roger Walter's main session talk from Tuesday morning at the 2025 Propel Conference. His topic, Outreach Culture.
Hey, I just want to start today with a quick story. One of my church members was at the library one day, and she couldn't get the printer to work at the library. And so she was stressing about it and trying it. And she probably spent 20 minutes working at the printer and the computer, running back and forth, trying to get it to work. She couldn't get it to work, and she goes, ah! And this guy is walking by. He's just a patron at the library, and he walks by, and he says, what's wrong? And she says, I can't get this to print. He says, well, let me try. And so I'm kind of techie, and he's playing with it. And he plays for about 15 minutes. And she says, I'm going to go get some help. So she runs down to the library place and she gets some help. And the lady at the library says, okay, I think I know what's wrong. And she looks at it. She says, now, how many copies did you want? She says, I just want 1 copy. It's this poem. It's just a Christian poem. And the guy says, that's been helping her, he says, could I get a copy too? I read it while you were running down to the other side. And she says, yeah. And so absolutely, you can have a copy of my poem. And so they both get their copies. The library person gives it to them, and they're just chit-chatting afterwards. He says, what church do you go to? She goes, I go to the Adventist Community Church over on St. John's. And he says, is that the church that's always doing the prophecy seminars? And she goes, yeah, it is. He says, when's your next one? Because I've been wanting to come. And so she shares, she says, the next one's like in September, and this is like 2 months away. And he says, here's my phone number. Please call me when you get it done. And I thought, that's what we're trying to do, is create a culture of outreach that within, now this was the cool part about that. My church member, she understood the cultural part of it, and it had become part of her culture. People come up to me and they say, when's our next seminar, Pastor? When's our next outreach? When's our next, food drive or whatever else? And because we have this culture built around outreach and evangelism. But here's the other part of that story that I think is really cool. And that is that the community understood our culture. The community came and said, that's the church that is always reaching into the community. And that's the church that's always doing things. And so I just feel like we made a dent in some ways, in some really good ways. Now, I want to take you to this idea of what are we doing here. There's an old TV show. I've told this story for years. And it shows my age a little bit, right? Anybody remember the Merv Griffin show? Okay. He was like the longest running television variety show because he went from like the 60s into the mid 80s or late 80s, something like that. And my mom used to watch him. And so because she overtook the TV back then, I had to sit and watch Merv. Well, I didn't actually see this particular episode, but one day he has a bodybuilder on it. Now, I don't know if you like to lift weights, or if you like the idea of what bodybuilders are doing or anything like that, but he's got this silk robe on and it comes, all the way down to the floor. And he's sitting and talking with him and with Merv, and they're talking about what it means to how much weight you got to lift and, how much steroids and drugs you have to pump, whatever. But they're just having this conversation. And then at the end of the conversation, Merv says to him, so what do you use those muscles for? And the guy smiles and he gets up and he takes his robe off and he's got his little skimpy bikini. I mean, like all the ladies in the room are probably going, that's disgusting because they can't stand bodybuilders most of the time. And he flexes. Can you see the muscles? Come on. Can you? He's flexing, and he's posing and he's doing all these things and he's doing all these gyrations. And then he sits back down. And Merv says, yeah, but what do you use these muscles for? And he looks at Merv kind of funny and he gets up again, takes the robe back off, and he flexes and he says, but what do you use them for? I want to just challenge you. I mean, this is day 3. Yeah. What are we doing here? This is not part of my talk, but I'm going to do it anyway. I hope you don't just take your notebook home that Danielle keeps Danielling about. I loved that line yesterday. That you don't just take the notebook home and stick it on a shelf next to last year's Propel conference, next to the one before that. And it just sits there. And then 10 years later, you throw it out because, I hope that we're doing something significant. And what I'm talking about today is I want to build a culture. Now that didn't bring, okay. I want to build a culture and culture involves all kinds of things: faith, food, art, attitudes, beliefs, language, customs, rituals. Everybody has their culture. My son's in the Navy, and they have a culture in the Navy, and it involves a lot of acronyms. Well, we're doing the MSOBJ, and going to the XYXYZ, and I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And so many times people are doing things that don't make a lot of sense. Adventists are the same. And so I want to tell you a story about a lady that came to my church. She talks about, she'd been coming to my church for 2 years. She wasn't a member. And one day she comes up to me. She says, Roger, who is Alan B. White? I'm like, how can you come to an Adventist church for 2 years and think it's Alan, not Ellen? And what are we doing? I think of, we talk about going to the GC. What is that? I had a lady at my church who went to the last general conference session, and she gets up at our first service and she says, hey, talks about the GC. And I said, hey, listen, when you go to the second service, about 20% of our congregation are not Seventh-day Adventists. They don't know the lingo. Could you explain yourself? She says, well, what do you mean? I said, well, don't get up and say the GC. Get up and talk about the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, the governing body of the worldwide church that we belong to. Just takes a paragraph to explain yourself, but it makes it open to people. But I think of, we have things like potluck. We have things like cradle roll. Why are we rolling cradles around? Like what are we talking about? I'll never forget When I first became a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, well, I wasn't even a member yet. Hadn't even been baptized. And I'm following my mom around church, and she was raised in church, and she was just coming back. I was 12 years old. And I'm walking through the church, and this little old lady, I mean, she was, in my book, at 12 years old, she was really old. She's probably like 50, 60, And I just felt like she was really old. And she leans over and says something to another lady, and they're whispering back and forth. And then she calls her a dork. And my mom had to explain that she wasn't calling her a dork, but it's Dorcas. You know what it is, right? Okay. And I used to think we don't see much of this anymore, but what about new Tina? I'm thinking, what was wrong with the old Tina? Or loam and Linda. What are we talking about? Planting Linda in the loam soil? We talk about turning in our tithes and our offerings. There's some huge things that go along to building a culture within our churches. These represent some things that we understand, but outsiders don't understand. And we have to, Vespers, that's, yeah. Yeah. These are things that I'm passionate about because I wasn't raised in the Adventist church. I don't understand some of the lingo. I don't understand it. And so I'm very careful about trying to reach people who I grew up with and who don't understand all those things. And so I want to take you down this outreach culture pyramid. Now, I've changed this since I published it in my book. You can get a free copy in the booth section, whatever you call it. I've changed it a little bit, and what you saw in your notebook is the old version of it. I've changed the terminology of it because when I was presenting this one time to a group of pastors who were in their 20s and 30s, they didn't understand what it meant to reap. They didn't understand what it meant to sow. And because of that, it's an old terminology. I've just changed the terminology a little bit, but I've also expanded the pyramid. You'll see. The first thing I want to talk about is relational outreach. We would call it, it's in your notebook, as friendship. I try to talk about, I can't say I always succeed, but I try to talk about building friendships within the community on an almost weekly basis at church, so that I'm reminding my congregation to go in and reach their community. We as Adventists tend to build walls, right? We build walls to protect our kids by sending them to other schools. We build walls with our food by buying it from the ABC, or, if anybody else happens to sell the right stuff. And we build all kinds of walls. We have our own music company, our own educational system, our own hospital system. I have church members that drive an extra 40 minutes to get to the hospital so they can go to the Adventist hospital in Portland rather than go to the one that's 10 minutes away from their house. We build all kinds of walls. What I'm trying to teach my congregation is to tear down some of those walls. When we were coaching somebody about making friendships in the community, it was really hard for this person to understand it at first. And when he went out one day and he came back to me on a Sabbath and he says, "Hey, Raj, I did this." I said, "What do you mean you did this?" He says, "I did the friendship thing. I went out and created a relationship with some people." He says, "You know Stacy and Roland?" I said, "Yeah, I know who Stacy and Roland are." He says, "Last night, Friday night, I took him out for dancing and drinking." And I'm like, "You did what?" And I'm like, this was a church member of mine. I grabbed him by the throat and started to squeeze. I'm like, you can't do that. I said, you can't go down to their level if you're going to create a relationship with people. You got to bring them up to your level. You got to build friendships. And he says, "Oh, I screwed it up, didn't I?" I said, "Yeah, you did, kind of big time." But he figured it out that it's not just about building friendships on the world standard. He made a mistake, but he understood that it's about building redemptive friendships. Relational outreach can be messy. It can cause some issues. I remember a time a guy showed up at my house. We were having a barbecue in the neighborhood, and it's just a neighborhood barbecue. And we said, "Bring whatever you want to grill, we'll grill it." And we had two grills. One was a veggie grill and one was a not veggie grill. And I just told the people grilling, I don't know anything about grilling, but I said, "Just keep my stuff away from the pork chops, or whatever else is out there. I just don't want that grease on me." And But this guy shows up. We got a volleyball net set up in the front yard. We got the barbecues going in the backyard. And we just said, bring whatever you want to grill. We'll grill it. And so everybody brings their stuff. And this friend of mine that I'd gone fishing with a few times, he shows up and I'm playing volleyball. I'm just about ready to hit the ball. And he says, hey, Raj. And I hit the ball. And then I stop and I step back and I look. He says, what do I do with this? And he reaches in the back of his pickup. And he pulls out a 6-pack. What do you do? Because relational outreach, I'm thinking to myself, what do you do with a 6-pack? And I'm like, put it in the fridge. You know, for one thing, it's hidden. Most of my members who are there will never see it. Okay. But number two, I realize he's not ready for the health message. I'm not advocating alcohol. He was the only one that drank any beer that week or that day at my house. He's the only one, and he only had one. He took 5 of them back home. And I'm like, but at some point in time, I'm going to get to the place where our friendship is strong enough that I can share the health message with him. I can share about Jesus Christ. You understand what I'm saying? Relational outreach, I want you to understand, can be a very messy thing because we're tearing down walls of our protective forces around us. And so, but I think it's crucial. I think the foundation here of what you need to understand about this pyramid is the foundation is love. And it's putting people first. That's what I see Jesus doing constantly. He constantly puts people first, above the rules, above the regulations, above everything else. He says, how can I take care of the principle of love and treat people well? The next aspect of the pyramid is the idea of community service, or friendship, or go from friendship to kindness to or service projects kind of thing. It's the idea where we get into the community and we're serving in the community and making a difference for good. This is your what's the word I want? I can't think. It's the idea of getting into the service. Our community services center is a way to do it. Our different classes that we do. We did God's Closet. We have a help fund. Some of the people I've coached have gone into the community and they've bought backpacks and they filled them with school supplies and they've given them out. Some of them have gone door to door. Others have gone, just had people come to church and pick them up. I had a church one time that I was helping and coaching that they went to a gas station and said, listen, gas prices are high. We want to pay you to bring your gas prices down. And so now they dropped their gas prices like 50 or 80 cents a gallon, and they paid up the difference. And while people were pumping their gas, when they drove up, they went out and pumped the gas for them, and then they washed their windshield. It was like an old-fashioned service station, right? That's what we used to call them, was a service station. And so they went out and they were serving in the community. They would hand them a card that just says, we just wanted to show you God's love in a practical way, no strings attached. And some information about their church on the backside. Listen, here's the goal. The goal would be that the principle of love comes out to everybody we come in contact with. And the first step is when they drive by and they see the sign for our church, I got a friend that goes to that church. The second step would be, and I see them always out serving in the community. They're always out doing good in the community. Does that make sense? And so the third step would be that you add value to their lives. This would be the sowing concept. Not the sowing concept in your notebook. This would be the bridge events. The bridge events are when you're inviting people to come to your church and you're adding value to their life through a parenting class, a financial peace university, some of those kinds of things. You're adding value, a stop smoking clinic. You're adding value to them. This is inviting them to come into the church for a non-religious gathering. There's nothing wrong with talking about God at the gathering, but we're not looking for decisions. We're not looking for making you a member of the church. We're just wanting to teach you about parenting. I had one church that I was helping with. They went off and taught a parenting class and showed people how to change diapers. This was up in Seattle area. And, because people were like, I don't know if I know how to change diapers. And, and people are struggling with all kinds of things. How do I pay my bills? How do I control a teenager? One a couple churches, they've done this love and logic stuff for parenting. I'm not a huge fan of love and logic, but I think it's about reaching into the community to invite them to come. And when they come to church, they realize all of a sudden that the walls of the church aren't falling down because they haven't been into the church for 30, 40 years. And guess what? I got a friend that goes to that church. And I find them always out there serving in the community, always helping somebody else in the community. They're giving money away, paying rent for people, helping them pay their bills. They're picking up trash in the park. I see this church. I got a friend there, and I see that church. They're always doing really cool stuff in the community. And you know what? I attended their parenting class, and it was good. It gave me some real solid tools to walk away with to help my kids, or me to not beat on my kids, or something, whatever it might be. Because, what we've always taught in our parenting classes is the number one Bible text on parenting is from Exodus 20, thou shalt not kill, right? And so that's your number one parenting tool, So the idea is to add value to life. If the foundation is love, then we're going to look for people and how we can support and help them. Does that make sense? The next step would be the sharing. This is in your book. It's called Sowing. But it's about, if I were to pick on Dan Stearns, it would be handing out glow tracts. If I were to, somebody else, we do Bible study mailings. You saw the lead generator in the video. You saw the idea of signs, news boxes. You could talk about, mailing Bible studies. You can talk about going door to door and praying with people. But it's sowing seeds for the kingdom. This is the most direct thing that we do to begin to sow seeds, to begin to share the gospel with people. The idea is, I got a friend that goes to that church. They're always out serving in the community. And I went to one of their financial classes, and it made me get on a budget, and I really appreciated that. And you know what? I read some of their literature. They handed me a couple of magazines, and I liked it. It was really positive reading. Now, that's part of the goal, the foundation being love, that people become the highest priority in what we do. It's not our doctrines. It's not the way we dress. It's not the way we smell. It's not the way we taste. It's not the way we look. It's simply about putting people first. But I want you to see something here, because a lot of churches do these four things over and over and over. And they're not seeing any growth in their church. And they can't understand why. I mean, they get an occasional baptism. They get, they baptize their own kids and that kind of thing. They get some growth, but it's not what they're hoping for. But if you look at those four things, those are no different than any non-Adventist church does. They're out doing some of the same things. They're out serving in the community. They're out, sharing good literature. They're out, helping people grow and loving on them and building friendship. They're no different. The one difference I think that makes a Seventh-day Adventist church different is the top of the pyramid. And that is the idea of our proclamation of our message. It is the message that makes Seventh-day Adventists different. It is the message that so many Adventist churches have stopped proclaiming. It is the message that we need to continue to proclaim and make a difference, because number one, it is the only thing within Adventism that is designed to get people to make a decision for Christ. Now, they can do it in Bible studies, but so oftentimes Bible study, people don't know how to do it, and they just study through the Bible, and they say, well, thanks for, this has been fun studying, and, I hope you come to church someday. And they never ask, they never call for a decision like Joanne Cortez was talking about the other morning. Our message is vitally important that we proclaim to people so that they understand the message. Now, here's the thing. I mean, it'll lead to us to baptisms. It leads to a decision. The bottom corner picture is my family when I was baptized. I'm the small guy there, and the evangelist that brought us into the church through that. I want you to understand why evangelism works. And so I want to just show you a chart here. The first piece of the chart is chaos. The second piece is about structure. The third piece is about principles. And the last is about integration. The reason evangelism works is because it takes people from chaos to structure. Our structured doctrinal principles are so crystal clear and so defensible that people say, wow, I'm going through a divorce, or wow, my life is falling apart and I need something going on there. Now, understand that structure is why it works. When I look at congregations and I was coaching somebody the other day and they said, we want to use this brochure. What do you think? And I said, it's a picture of Jesus on the front. And nothing wrong with Jesus. I kind of like him, okay? He's a good friend of mine, okay? Nothing wrong with Jesus, but it doesn't work on the front, okay? Tyler could tell you the same thing. It doesn't work. And I said, it's a great looking brochure and it really works really well for the Adventist congregations, but it doesn't reach the community. And they're saying, well, why not? And I talked to them about this, that most of the people that come to our prophecy meetings are coming out of some form of chaos, a divorce, a remarriage, a wedding, a move across the country, some form of, they might have just lost their job, some form of chaos that they're in the middle of. And when they come, they're looking for something different. That's why the current event brochures work. That's why the Beast brochures were working for quite a while, because it showed people that their life is in chaos and maybe there's something they can get out of it. We take them from chaos to structure, and we move from structure into principles. After they're baptized, we begin to teach the principles. So I talk to my new believers class, and I talk to them about Sabbath keeping, and I present 5 principles for Sabbath keeping. People will come to me and say, hey, Pastor, is it okay if I go water skiing on Sabbath? I said, I'm not going to answer that for you. Well, why not? I said, number one, it's not my job to decide what's right for your life, and your job isn't to decide for me. But let me just give you some principles. And I walk them through the 5 principles of Sabbath keeping, and they're going, oh, that makes sense. When people learn the principles, we take them from there into the integration, where it becomes part of life. We don't even have to stop and think through the principles anymore. Does that make sense? And so part of the reason that this works, our evangelism works, is that first quadrant, taking them from chaos into giving them a structure, which leads them to principles. Well, now, here's the problem. When we get to life integration, in about 4, 5, 7 years, somewhere in that range, the average Adventist quits liking public evangelism. And they're like, why is that? Well, it's not targeted at you anymore. It's targeted at people who are in chaos. And guess what? When we baptize people within Adventism, we get them involved in our Adventist schools. We send them up the school system, and we raise their socioeconomic standard. When they start returning a faithful tithe, when they stop buying cigarettes and booze, their budget goes up, and we raise their socioeconomic standard by giving them a good education and teaching them how to use their money. And now all of a sudden they're not in chaos, and now they're trying to live in integration and principles, and they're beginning to understand. And because they're not in chaos, they're not just a big fan of evangelism anymore. My goal in creating a culture of outreach is that we would teach people before they get into that role where they no longer like it, that they're actually going out and reaching out people to begin with. Now, that piece of the pyramid, the top of the pyramid, is about the proclamation. And I was listening to Jose Cortez talk one time, who was here the other night. I was listening, I think it was at the ministerial meetings in Kentucky when he was talking, and I was in a breakout session, and he was talking, and he was telling us, there was about 30 people in the room, and he was talking about the idea that of our Adventist public evangelism, the retention rate runs at 65% nationwide, NAD-wide. Okay. And he's going off and listen, I've told Jose this, but he was decrying the fact that it's only 65. We should be doing better. He's going on and on and on about it. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's true. We would all like 100%, wouldn't we? We would all like to see everybody who comes in, who makes a decision to stay. Wouldn't we like that? We would like that. And so I went up to him afterwards and I said, Jose, do you play baseball? He says, of course. And I said, if you got a hit 65% of the time, would you make the Hall of Fame? You know what Babe Ruth's average over the course of his career, his hitting average was? His average was 35%. You know what Hank Aaron's was, who broke his record for home runs? You know what his average was? 305. That's 30%. They made the Hall of Fame easily, okay? And my point was that we would all like to make the Hall of Fame, but if we would hit 65% of the time, we're doing pretty good, right? So what I want to show you today is that there are some very little things. Now, I read a book years ago called 212. You know what 212 is? It's the temperature to boil water. The book makes a very strong point that at 211 degrees, you have hot water. You have hot water at 180 degrees. You have hot water at 100 degrees, right? You have hot water, but when you get to 211, you just have hot water. But when you add 1 degree, it boils. And here's the point. It takes some very little things to make evangelism work. It takes very little things. We know we preach the messages. We know we have to send out brochures or do, online ads or those kinds of things. We know there's some certain things we have to do. But what's fascinating is I visited a church just recently, a church down near my area. And I went out to their opening night for their evangelistic series. And I walked in, and this is a guy that I've probably known 25, 30 years. He's a great pastor. He's doing his own evangelistic series, and he's a pretty good preacher, and he understands evangelism, I thought. But it was all these little things that he left out. All the little things that he left out that I'm like, He didn't have much crowd to start with. He didn't finish with hardly anybody, didn't get any baptisms. And I'm not complaining about him, but I'm realizing that that's why God has been calling me to run Evangelist, to help people understand some of those little things so that they make a success of what they do to spend God's money. I want to walk you down the other side of that. The 65%, my church is running at about 70 to 75% retention rate. And I want to show you some reasons why, okay? And I think it's crucial to understand some of these things. They're little things. So you walk back down the other side of the pyramid. I want you to understand that up the side of the pyramid is how we reach people. Going down the other side of the pyramid is how we keep the people. All right? Now, but it's exactly the same stuff. We proclaim the message at the beginning of this, on the upside of the pyramid, to reach people. We proclaim the Adventist message, the three angels' messages that is crucial to our understanding of prophecy and scripture and why we were called into existence. So we proclaim it. On the backside of it, we teach them how to worship the God we taught them about. Now, I understand that we talk about worship. We talk about the divine hour. We've done some worship here, but I know how easy it is to get distracted. I asked a guy in my church one time, well, I didn't ask, a lady running our worship stuff asked the sound guy, what's your job description? Because, and what he said from sitting up in the balcony, he says, my job description is to be invisible. Because what happens if I forget to turn my mic on? And I step up on the platform and I forget to turn my mic on. Who do they look at? Do they look at me or up in the sound booth? Okay, so these guys today, when they handed me the microphone and said, don't touch it, we'll unmute you, okay? Because as soon as I forget to turn it on, everybody looks back there. And their job is to be invisible. And I think really that's all we are doing on Sabbath mornings, is trying to be invisible so that we point direction to Jesus and we point direction to Him and we teach people how to worship. But I want you to understand that Adventists are so head knowledge full that we don't really know how to worship. What happens if you're not preaching about one of the doctrines Or the signs of the second coming on Sabbath morning that some people just live on. Listen, it's good stuff. It's not that I don't believe it, but I had a guy quite a few years ago. He came to me one Sabbath and he was a little heated, a little ticked off, a little struggling. He says, Raj, when are we ever going to hear a sermon on the second coming again? I said, we just did last Sabbath, and you were here. He didn't know how to listen. He didn't know how to hear what God was saying that morning. He didn't know how to understand worship and what it means and how it affects us. He thought it was all about up here. And somehow he even missed that. Part of the way to keep people is having good, solid worship services. At my church, we don't preach on the doctrines much during the year. We do periodically. I'll preach a sermon on the Sabbath or a sermon series on the Sabbath or the second coming, but it's not like an every week kind of thing. In fact, most of the time I'm preaching is about living life practically in application of personal spirituality. Because Paul says prophecy is for the beginners. But those who are mature should be eating the deeper things of life, drinking more than just milk. And I think the big things in Scripture that we need to be dealing with is how do I live my life as a Christian on Monday morning? And so that's where we spend our time. But I try to make sure that worship is strong. I was coaching one guy and he says, we don't do contemporary worship. I said, worship isn't about contemporary. It doesn't matter what style. I mean, I pastored a contemporary church plant. I'm at a traditional church now, and I had a guy move from Colorado where we did the contemporary church plant, and he got transferred for a few months to Vancouver, of all places. And he came to my church, and the first week he was there, I took him home to lunch, and on the way home, he says, so the name of my church in Colorado was called The Adventure. And I said, so was the adventure not you, or is this not you? Because we're pretty traditional at my church. We have some contemporary pieces, but small. He was confused because for 11 years I led this contemporary church plant that grew to over 250, 270 people in attendance on a weekly basis. And we led this, but we did public evangelism and we grew it. But he's like, I don't understand. And I said, listen, Scott, this isn't about style for me. This is about connecting people to Jesus. And so I can worship in whatever style is available. I can teach people how to worship in whatever style. I prefer contemporary Christian music. My wife does not. And so we have this blend in our home, let alone blend in our church, right? And so there's this idea that one guy I was coaching, he says, I don't do contemporary worship at my church. They would never deal with it. I said, but worship isn't about contemporary. Worship is about what's going on in people's hearts. And that's what we have to make sure is going on, is making sure people's hearts are strong and growing and understanding. And I need to keep going. The next step is about learning. Learning is about taking people to Sabbath school. It's about teaching them and mentoring them and helping them grow after their decision. They've made a decision from the proclamation series to become a member. Now we need to teach them. I had a church that I was working with that they had guys that would take people out to the ABC. I want to take you to the Adventist Book Center. I want to show you all the books that are just Adventist books that will help you grow. But they were mentoring these people. You see what I'm saying? They were taking these people, instead of saying, oh, you're going to get a couple magazines in the mail in the next 2 or 3 months that'll come, and then they'll come every month after that. Instead of just dropping them after they were baptized, they were picking them up, holding their hand, and walking them through some of the culture of Adventism. It was the idea that we're going to take them a book now and then. When we had Ron Cluzet come in one time to do an evangelistic series for us, and he gave us a stack of books to give to everybody. I mean, it was, if you took a grocery bag, one of those carry-home grocery bags, not the paper ones, but the ones with the big handles on them, he filled them with books. They were Ellen White books. They were books, some books that he had written, some books that other people had written. And he gave us a stack of books. It probably stacked up about this high and filled these bags. And he taught people how to do it. Go 1 month and give them a book. Go 2 weeks later and give them a different book. Go in a couple more months and give them another one. Invite them over to lunch and give them another one, slowly. But we had so many people that just walked out and gave these people, here, this is for you now that you're baptized. You know how many books the average person, average American reads a year? 1 book a year, okay? And to hand them 15 or so books, they were totally overwhelmed. So we've cut that down, and we're trying to teach people to say, yeah, take them a book, take them a magazine, take them out to eat, invite them home to lunch, slowly mentor them, take them on a hike. That's what it is about learning, about teaching some of the culture of Adventism. You can talk about, those are the things. The next one is about teaching. We had the value added, which was about bridge events. Now the backside of that is teaching. And so after we have an evangelistic series, we do several things. We have a Bible marking class that meets on Sabbath mornings where we go over the same stuff that the evangelist is going over. It's different order. It's different format. It's question and answer. It's just looking at the Bible. There's nothing else to do. We usually teach a history of Adventism class midweek. We teach a class on Daniel and Revelation midweek. And the reason we do that is because when we get done with an evangelistic series, what does the average member say? Glad that's over. Can we go back to the TV now? The average person that's been coming to the seminar, though, goes, wait, I've been learning so much that I'd never heard of before. Is there something else that's going to go on to fill my time? I don't want to go back to the TV. And so we do 2 to 3 classes a week, plus Sabbath morning, where I bring them into a class that I usually teach. This last time I did not teach it, but I usually teach it because I want to control the environment a little bit as I teach them some things about what they've been learning. Because people make decisions at events, but they follow through with those decisions at a small group setting. So I want to make sure they don't go to somebody's Sabbath school class that is just going to be about Ellen White, which I believe in Ellen White. I read her almost every day, okay? But I'm not a problem with that, but I know how sometimes it can be misused in the average church. And so I want to control the environment where they can learn some more and continue to reinforce the things that they learned at the seminar. That's what we're doing on the backside of that. The next one is about involvement. I want to get people involved. I want to make sure that they have something to do. So when they go to church, they're feeling like there's something good to do. Does that make sense? My wife says, if I wasn't a pastor, I would hate church because I like getting up front. The number one fear in America, you know what it is? Public speaking. You know what the number 2 fear is? Death, right. Means more people would rather die than get up front. Okay? My number one fear is that they won't let me get up front to talk. Okay? And so if I'm not a pastor, I'm going to be sitting out there and I'm going to be going, not enough, and trying to, stay awake. But I find that that's true for almost everybody. People that are involved, it becomes part of who they are. Listen, the main group of people that we lose when we do a public evangelistic series are those that came from the Methodist Baptistarian churches. All right. So they're already settled into their church. They already have their friends. They already have their social clues going on in their group of friends at their church. That's the people we lose. One of the big myths of public evangelism is that we only turn the Methodist Baptistarians into Adventists. But the majority of people we baptize come from a non-churched category. They're not going to church anywhere. And we keep like 85% of those people. The idea behind this is to get them involved, make them an usher. They might not be ready to be a deacon. We had a guy that he was part of a Baptist church, and we baptized him as an Adventist, him and his wife. And 2 years later, I was a young pastor at the time, 2 years later, we made him an elder. It was the worst thing we could have done for him. And Ellen White actually gives us some counsel not to do that, okay? We thought we were smarter than her, and so we decided to go ahead and do it, and we made a mistake. But there's lots of ways to get them involved. Hey, could you bring a dish for potluck next week? Hey, could you help clean up with a potluck? We can talk to people about setting up chairs. We can talk about making them ushers. We can talk about being a part of the social committee. We can make them greeters. I had one church that said, your job as a new member, we have a job for you. And they're like, really? For me? You'd like me to get involved? Yeah, we want you to get involved. And this church told them, we want to make you somebody who's looking out for the new guests when they walk through the door and make them feel comfortable. But that can be dangerous too, okay? You got to teach people what they're doing. I had a guy one time, our church building was about this size, and he was sitting in the back. This lady walks in, and he's a new member, and he sits down in front of her, turns around, and was talking to her. And I walked by at one point in time, and he's saying, yeah, and so if you go to this website, you can read all about Ellen White that this church is really big on, and he's telling all about it. But you should keep reading because let me tell you about the mark of the beast. This is the most incredible thing I've ever heard. And I walk by him, and I'm behind her, so she can't see me. I'm like, stop. He couldn't see me. He couldn't stop talking. But I had a conversation with him afterwards, one of those throat-grabbing conversations. And I wanted to make sure that things were going well, but if we don't release people to get involved, then are they part of the family? So the last step is about building relationships again. The idea is that the average person who becomes a Seventh-day Adventist, if they don't have 7 close personal friends within the first 3 years, they're not staying. That's big. That means that we have to intentionally seek to build relationships. And some of the churches that I've been coaching, they take a real strong stance in building small groups so that they can pull people into those groups, because it is in those small group settings that you're going to build friendships. Here's a little secret. When you stand up in church and you tell everybody to stand up and greet each other, they're not building relationships. Okay? Now, I love that time. My kids hate it. I'm an extrovert, and I love it because all it does is get people out of their seats and get the blood flowing, and it helps them at least say, "What's your name?" "Oh, okay." And then the next week they say, "What was your name again?" But they've just made a connection. It's not hard to shake hands with them again. I don't mind that meet and greet time, but it's crucial to understand things. It's crucial to keep going forward in some of those things. And so the idea is you go up the pyramid to reach people. You come back down the pyramid to keep the people. We have found 70 to 75% retention rate. I wish it was higher. I always wish it was higher, right? I wish it was 100%. It's not. But I want you to keep understanding some things. I'm going to run really fast. I'm probably getting overtime, but so what? I got the microphone now, unless they cut me off. We'll be done. I promise we'll get done soon. I want to just run you through a couple things to give you some understanding of where we go with things. This is a chart that a friend of mine created years ago, and it's going to have 4 quadrants in it. This is the unchurched, non-Seventh-day Adventists. If you look at it, it's divided into 2 categories: those who never went to church and those who formerly went to church. That black line at an angle is slowly moving that direction. Okay? And that was when it was about 30% of the people were non-churched. It's probably getting close to 45 to 50% of the people who were never churched. Okay? It's the people I grew up with. It's the people who I was. When I went to church for the first time with my grandma, I was 3 or 4 or 5 years old. And I, up front, they've got these blue curtains high up on the wall. And I'm thinking, oh, it looks like a puppet show. And then the curtains open. I'm like, we're going to have a puppet show. And 2 people walk down in these funny looking suits. And then one pushed the other one over, and he comes up wet, and then they shut the curtains again. I'm like, what was that? I had no idea what that was. And then the next time I go with my grandma to church, they were passing out these snacks from pew to pew. And they wouldn't let me have any. And I'm like, what kind of people are these that won't let me have a snack? The formerly churched is shrinking. The never churched is growing. We have to think through what it means to reach those people. When we just did our evangelistic series, we used some advertising that said "Signs of the Second Coming" on the front. And after we ordered it, and the evangelist and I, we consulted with it and everything else, it didn't hit me until after we ordered it that I looked at it and I'm like, there's nothing about Scripture on the front. There's nothing about the Bible on the front. There's nothing about the second coming of Jesus on the front. And we started this series on January 10. What comes in late January this last year? the second coming of Donald Trump. And so I got that brochure in the mail, and I thought, it's the same size as the political stuff I get in the mailbox. All right, it's the second coming. Is that talking about Donald Trump? I mean, I knew it wasn't, but do people that receive it, did they know that? Listen, we have to start thinking with the idea we can't stand up in front anymore and say, well, you all know the story of Job. Because they don't. And so we have to start thinking about that never churched, because it's a bigger and growing issue. The next one is a churched but non-SDA. It's divided into two categories, those who are passive and those who are committed. Pretty similar to the Adventist group, right? We have people that barely go to church. We have people that are really committed every time the doors are open. The third group is the former Adventist, the unchurched SDA. And that's divided into angry, bitter, the passive, and the close. You know angry and bitter former Adventists. They got mistreated at academy. They don't want to ever come back again. I had a guy come to me the other day and says, all my old friends from high school, we went to academy together. He says, all my old friends are going to church again. I said, well, that's great. He said, yeah, but they're not going to an Adventist church and they know better. I'm like, well, do they know better? Like they might have been taught it in high school, but do they know that that's true? Some of them are angry. Some of them are bitter. There's others that are passive. Yeah, I might go to church someday again. I might not. There's some things I might do. I maybe. And then there's those that are close. Those who are thinking about going back to church. My mom was probably in the close category. My dad was somewhere between, my dad was also raised an Adventist, was somewhere between passive and bitter. When they knocked on our door and inviting us, the former Adventists, to an evangelistic meetings, my brother was going to go into his junior year in high school, and my mom had a thought. If he is going to leave home in a couple of years, he ought to be introduced to religion somehow. She was in the close category. See? And so that's the former Adventists. The current Adventists, you would divide between the new, those who fill the pews, and the DDDs, the definitely devoted disciples. They are the ones who, the definitely devoted disciples are those who are there whenever the doors of the church are open. They're your head deacons and they're your primary deacons. They're your board members. Those are the people that we plan everything around. In fact, if you look at it, we do almost everything we do in the Adventist church where that red circle is. The hikes we go on, the socials we plan, the community service activities, it's, whatever it is, almost everything we do is where that red circle is. I want to challenge that concept because I want to say, what would it be like if we moved the circle? Because all of a sudden now we're reaching into the formerly churched, we're reaching into the non-Adventists who are committed and those who are barely committed, and we're reaching into the former Adventists. I think our focus in creating an outreach culture in our church needs to shift. So whenever I get up front and I make an announcement, I don't talk about the GC. I don't talk about calling people dork, okay? I explain myself, and it takes a little longer to say things because I'm going to talk about the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists who are the governing body of the worldwide church of the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. Well, that's a mouthful. But to the person who's sitting there who doesn't understand the culture, they go, oh, got it. Just like that. We can still sing the same songs. We can still make the same announcements, but we got to think through who we're talking to create an outreach culture by moving that circle to the place where we understand that some of our congregation doesn't know a thing about what we're talking about. I got a guy, went for a walk with him the other day. He started coming to our church. He came to our church. He's friends with a church member. During COVID, when their school shut down, they sent their kids to the Adventist school. I'm so thankful that the Adventist school stayed open, and they saw explosion of growth because of it. But they sent their kids to the Adventist school. They were going back to public school this year. But through COVID, they were going to our school. And they started coming to church. So they came one time. He shows up on Sabbath. His friends were surprised. I had met him once in his friend's house. He invited us. We went for a walk together. The next week he was gone. And I'm like, nuts. Well, their friends came to me. He has a genetic kidney problem. And on Friday afternoon the next week, they called him up and said, we have a kidney for you. Surgery is scheduled for 4:00 tomorrow. Do you want it? He's like, absolutely. So he missed church for about 6 weeks. 6 weeks later, he comes back for the second time ever in a church. He was raised in an atheist home. He brings his 2 girls. He brings his wife, who was raised Catholic. She has seemingly no interest in Catholicism anymore. They all come to church. He's wearing a mask. Obviously, he just had kidney transplant. He's come every week since then. 2 weeks ago, just 2 weeks ago, they come to church and we go for a walk together. Little hike. It's kind of flat, but it's, anyway, we call it a hike. It's not, but it was like a hike. And while we're walking, he says to me, so you said something in your message a couple weeks ago about not being raised in church. How do you get from there to where you are now? Because you're pretty involved now. And I said, let me give you a summary story. I said, I just wrote a book. Pacific Press just published it called Matthew Asks Why. I'm going to give it to you next week when you come. But I gave him a summary statement of how we became Seventh-day Adventist Christians. And I said, here's the point I'm trying to make. When at one point in time in my story, when I was baptized, my whole dream in life was to play professional baseball. I was never that kid that was going to be an engineer one week and a doctor the next and an astronaut the next week who changed, whatever they wanted to do, like so many kids do. I was never that kid. My whole life, I wanted to play baseball. That's all I wanted to do. The day I got baptized as a Seventh-day Adventist, I leaned forward in the car. This is before seatbelt laws. Don't try this at home, okay? I leaned forward in the car and I said to my folks, if I'm going to be a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, I don't think I'm going to be able to play baseball. My dad's dream for me was to play professional baseball. He didn't know what to say. He was shocked. And then I leaned forward a few minutes later and I said, if I'm not going to be a baseball player, maybe I'll be a pastor. And here's what I was telling this story to this atheist friend of mine. And I said, at 12 years old, how I got from there to here is that God laid a call on my life and it changed me forever. And he says to me, what's a call? And I'm like, wow, I've told that story 100 times. Never crossed my mind. We've got to change the culture of our churches to begin to be, we're always reaching out. One quick thing, and then I'm done. I've never had a church board fight. And the reason is, I believe, is because my church is too busy worried about reaching out than they are to look at everybody else's pimples. Okay? So, if we're going to make the Hall of Fame, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age.
Let's take a moment for some reflection. It's really important to take a few minutes thinking about what you just heard from Dr. Walter in order to lock it in. What stood out from his message for you? How can you apply it to your own ministry? And when this episode ends, pause for 5 or 10 minutes and let your mind wander. It's a simple but powerful practice. Well, that's it for this episode. We'd love to hear from you. You can send an email to podcast@propelconference.org. And please mark your calendar for next year's Propel Conference coming to Silver Spring, Maryland, April 12 to 15, 2026. Special thanks to Dr. Roger Walter for speaking at the 2025 Propel Conference and to Forecasting Hope for sponsoring this episode. This has been the Propel Podcast, inspiration and innovation to grow your church. The Propel Podcast is produced by the Sermon View crew, and the event recording services were provided by Adventist Learning Community. I'm Larry Witzel, wishing you God's richest blessing in your own evangelistic journey. Please join us again next time for another episode of the Propel Podcast.